just want to say a huge thank you and welcome to Dr. Morris Gleeson, who's leading our workshop talk today about researching your family tree, and he's also going to give us an update on the O'Malley DNA project and the Finding Grace DNA project. So Morris is going to tell you all about it. So if you can put your hands together for a warm welcome for Morris.
Thank you, Grace. Thanks very much. Thank you, Grace. It's great to be here, and welcome to the O'Malley Clan Gathering 2025. I think we might get a few more people coming into the room as time goes on, but we'll try and make this workshop as interactive as possible. So I will have questions for you during the course of the evening. So there is a full bar outside, just use it cautiously. What I'm going to talk about is some records, first of all, and how to research your O'Malley line using some of the records that are available, and particularly for those of you from the diaspora, maybe looking at records that could help you connect with your O'Malley ancestors in Ireland. So trying to cross the pond and bridge that gap is a very important thing. The other thing I'll talk about is how DNA can actually help you break through some of your brick walls, and I'll talk about both Y DNA, which goes back along the father line, and also we'll talk about autosomal DNA. So let's first of all talk about the 7 steps to doing your research, and many of you will have already done this. First thing is to start with what you know and write it down. The second step is to ask others about what they know. So how many people have interviewed older generations within the O'Malley family? Yeah, a few hands going up. There may also be a family historian out there that's done most of this work for you. So it is important to ask around and find the cousin who's spent maybe the last 25 years doing the O'Malley family history. Now, there's various ways that you can start a family tree, either using software or a website. And I use Ancestry because it's just very, very handy. How many people use Ancestry for their family tree? And again, about at least 50% of the audience there putting up their hands. But there's also software packages, and there's also free sites like WikiTree is also very popular, and that you don't have to pay anything for that at all. Then step 4 would be accessing what I call the standard records, and these would be records like the ones that we have on Ancestry, MyHeritage. Family Search can also be quite good for some records. And then Find My Past has a specific Irish website as well. So those can be quite useful. And then there's specific Irish record sets, and we'll look at those during the course of the workshop. Then the idea is to build backwards, generation by generation. And what you need to do is you need to prove that each person is the child of the parents that are listed above them. And that can be very, very challenging as the records get sparser and sparser and sparser as you go back in time. So we'll take a look at that. The next step then is once you hit that brick wall, and we all hit that brick wall, we need to characterize that brick wall ancestor as best we can. This brick wall ancestor is frequently called the most distant known ancestor or the earliest known ancestor. And then step 6, we can use DNA to confirm the research that we have already done, but also take it a step further and test hypotheses, test theories that you have. You know, is this family over here related to that family over there? DNA can help with that, and it can help you break through brick walls. And the last step I'm going to talk about is using DNA to access unusual or rare or private records. And if Paul McLaughlin was here, he would be talking about a book that his great-grandfather wrote called Well, It Was News to Me. And that is a font of knowledge about how the O'Malleys of... where is Paul from?
The Upper Peninsula in...
It was Mackinac, wasn't it?
Wisconsin.
Yes. So how they moved into that area and set up a wonderful hotel there. And it has lots of information and certainly helped Paul and his family build their family tree. The other interesting thing that has happened recently is AI, artificial intelligence. And I have found using ChatGPT extremely useful to answer questions that you don't know. So anytime you don't know something and you're left there wondering, gosh, I don't know the answer to that, ask AI, ask ChatGPT, and it can come up with some very, very useful and interesting information. But let's just dive in first to accessing those standard records. And we can divide them into early life records, middle life records, and later life records. And these are the kind of records that you would be looking for no matter where in the world you happen to be living. And the idea here, again, is build backwards, generation by generation, and prove with these records that the child that you have in your tree belongs to those parents that you have in your tree. And that happens until you hit a brick wall. Sometimes that brick wall is in Ireland, but a lot of times it's elsewhere. It's the country to where your ancestors emigrated. And trying to bridge that gap between the New World country and the Old World country can be quite a challenge. Now, I take quite a strategic approach to Irish records, and you can see here, I'll just move this out of the way so that we have a little bit more space, and I think I will hide that panel. Hide the floating meeting controls, there we go. But this is, if you like, modern day, the 1900s, 1960, 50, 40, 30. If we're going back in time as we move to the right-hand side, back to about 1760. And you have civil registration records. These are the official government records about births, marriages, and deaths. But these tend to start around about 1864. So how many people have ancestors who were living in Ireland after 1864? Okay, there's a few people. How many people have ancestors who left Ireland before 1864? And again, it's about half and half. So for a lot of those of you who do not have ancestors who lived in Ireland, these civil registration records will not be immediately important for your particular ancestors, but they will be important if, when you go back, in order to go back further, you actually need to go sideways and start looking at the siblings and the cousins of your brick wall ancestors, and maybe tracing down to the living descendants of them today in order to ask them to do a DNA test. In order to ask them, do you have the letters in the attic that my ancestors wrote to your ancestors in the 1860s? Do you have the family Bible? Do you have information on your side of the family about my side of the family? So these records can be very, very useful. The church records go back before the 1860s. They're particularly useful for that 1830 to 1860 period, but then they start getting sparser as you go back in time, and before 1700 you really would be very lucky to find relevant church records for your particular family. Unless you live in Wexford town, where the church records go back to the 1600s. So if you have any ancestors from Wexford town, you could be sitting on a gold mine of church records that go back that far. Now in Ireland we only have two surviving censuses from 1901 and 1911, and we have census fragments from 1821 to 1851, but we do have a very useful census substitute called Griffith's Valuation, which ran from 1847 to 1864, and we also have revised or cancelled land valuation books that will take you from that mid-1800 position all the way up to modern times. And I'll show you an example of how I used that to actually identify cousins who are still living on my Gleeson ancestral land in Tipperary. And you can do exactly the same with your family tree to find out where was the ancestral homeland where your ancestors lived, and then you can visit it and you can touch the stone walls, because those stone walls were built by your ancestors. We also have another census substitute, the tithe books, the tithe allotment books, and then we have a variety of other record sets like directories, Gravestones can be very useful, and they can take you right back as well. Wills and probate and land deeds can take you back to the early 1700s. If your ancestors were leasing land, then they may actually appear in these land deeds. And then there's a variety of newspapers that can be very helpful, and there's court records as well. So let us, so the particular records of interest to those whose ancestors lived at the beginning, or left at the beginning of the 1800s, going up to about the 1850, would be these ones here. So some church records. Probably the census and census substitutes are not going to be terribly helpful, but you'll be relying on directories, gravestones, wills and probates, and some of the early newspapers. So let's talk briefly about early life records. And there is a handout with this workshop that I will be emailing, or we'll email it to everybody, so that you actually have all of these links. And also I'm recording the talk for YouTube, so you'll be able to see this again if there's any part of it that you want to go back and see. But the main website for the civil birth registration records is irishgenealogy.ie. And like I say, most of those records start in 1864. There are some non-Catholic marriage records that go back to 1845, but deaths only start at 1864. For church records, Roots Ireland would be the one that I normally go to. And again, that is very, very useful. It can go back to the 1600s in Wexford, but for most people, about 1820 is when you start running out of luck. And the church records in Mayo and Galway started even later. So some church records in some parishes only started in the 1880s. So you might not even be able to find church records for your ancestors. The census fragments, 1901, 1911 was the full census, and fragments before that can be searched on National Archives website. And in the UK, censuses were from 1841 to 21, and in the US from 1790 all the way up to 1950. So again, these can give very, very useful pieces of information, and you can rebuild entire families using these census records. Military can be quite good as well, but I want to give you some examples of how a naturalization record can actually tell you who the parents of your earliest known ancestor were. And we'll also look at immigration records, the Immigrant Savings Bank, and the Boston Pilot, where they advertised for missing friends. So this is a naturalization record, and just to show you, it's for a William Morrissey, but it actually names his wife, Josephine, and all of their children. So this record reconstructs the entire family. But the thing that I'm interested in is the fact that he came over to the United States, arriving on the 26th of June, 1913, on a ship called the Arabic. And that is a really important clue because it leads you to an immigration record, a ship's manifest list. And these immigration records usually recorded the names of the people that were their closest relatives back home. So if you can discover what ship your ancestors came over to the US on, there's a good chance that you'll be able to find that specific immigration record, that ship's list, that will allow you to identify maybe the surviving father or the surviving mother back home in Ireland and the townland or town from where they came. So that is a very useful record to explore. Another useful one is the Immigrant Savings Bank. And the Immigrant Savings Bank was set up specifically for immigrants. And it is still standing in New York today, in downtown Manhattan. And it can record the actual place that your immigrant ancestor came from. And in this case, it's Stranorlar in Donegal in Ireland. Stranorlar has been mistranscribed as Stranorlan. It's actually an R at the end instead of an N. But this type of record will tell you exactly where your ancestors came from. And again, it's available on Ancestry, as is this one, which is the Missing Friends in the Boston Pilot. And this is just a place where people could advertise looking for people. So I found some O'Malley examples, and we have a Thomas and a Mary O'Malley, they were siblings, of the townland of Corran, so very specific information on the specific townland they came from, parish of Magoon, County Mayo. When last heard from in 1863, they were living in Harrisburg, Lewis County, New York. Any information of them will be thankfully received by their sister. So now you know their sister's name was Cicely, and she married a Mr. Daly. And that can be information that really helps you build out your family tree. Another one was for Patrick O'Malley, a native of the town of Westport, where we're sitting today, County of Mayo, who enlisted in the 1st Kentucky Regiment and afterwards in Company I, 113th Regiment, Ohio Infantry. When last seen, he was in Cincinnati, Ohio. There is a large sum of money from Washington, and he cannot be received for his child till an account of his arrival here. Any information of him, living or dead, please, will be thankfully received by John Gibbons Bakery, number 129 Front Street, Cincinnati, Ohio. Anyone here from Cincinnati? I was just wondering if somebody might have got that money, because if not, it might still be available. So those are the early life records and some of the key websites you can use for those early life records. Marriage, middle life records include marriage, and again Irish genealogy for the civil records, Roots Ireland for the church records. But also look for the births and baptism records of the children of your earliest known ancestor, and not just his descendant, that is your immediate ancestor, but the siblings of that descendant, because they will potentially be very, very useful for going sideways in order to go backwards. We also have newspapers on Ancestry, newspapers.com, Find My Past, the British Newspaper Archive and the Irish News Archive. And directories can be very helpful. They're on Ancestry. Court and Land Records, again on Ancestry, Find My Past, and the Irish Registry of Deeds, which will take you back potentially to 1704. That's when they started in Ireland. So if you can find your ancestors in the Registry of Deeds, there may be a lot of information written on those land deeds, because usually what they did was a lease for 3 lives. In other words, you wanted to lease some land, and it wasn't for 50 years, it wasn't for 100 years. It was for an arbitrary amount of time, which was defined by the lives of 3 people that you named. So people said, okay, well, I'll pick Queen Victoria, I'll pick Prince Harry, because he's still quite young and he's probably going to live a long time, and I'll pick my youngest son, Michael, who's only 2 years old. So the lease land lasted for the life of the longest one of those 3 people. And those 3 people may very well be very close family members of the person that took out the lease. So leases can be very, very very helpful, but it's also very unusual to see who they named as who they thought was going to live the longest. And as soon as that 3rd person died, that's when the lease came to an end, and it had to be renewed at that point in time if the landowner wanted to renew the lease for that particular person. Later life records include the death records on Irish genealogy. US death certificates are really interesting because they do have the capacity to mention the parents' names, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a while. If you were looking for modern deaths, like deaths in the last 20 years or so, then the website rip.ie is very, very useful, because it gives you the obituary, which frequently gives you the entire family as well. So very, very useful if you're trying to come forward in time and research living cousins. Now, burial records and gravestones are on a variety of different websites. The links will be in the handout. But some of these can be very, very useful because there's a burial register as well as the gravestone itself. And then probates and will are held on the National Archives of Ireland website, and again that's for free. And a lot of these Irish graveyard websites are for free as well. So there's a lot of useful information out there. Now this is a US death certificate, and it's for an Austin O'Malley. And he was a married person. He was 53 years old when he passed away in Scranton, in New Jersey. Does it say? No, it's Scranton, Pennsylvania. And he passed away. Where's his date of death? There it is, date of death, June the 6th, 1918. It gives his occupation, it gives his birthplace, and it gives the name of his father, Austin O'Malley. And it gives the name of his mother, Catherine Gavin. So this is an example of how a US death certificate can give you the information about the parents of your earliest known ancestor. And like I say, if these were blank, and we've had that experience recently, then you could look maybe at Austin's, where's his name gone? Austin, oh yeah, if he had siblings. So for example, Bridget O'Malley, we could look at Bridget to see if her death certificate names the parents. And you could go through each of the siblings and see, is there at least one where the parents are named? And that can actually allow you to break through that brick wall and go back to the previous generation. So many of these death certificates are on Ancestry, some are on Family Search, some are only as an index entry, in which case then you have to ask AI, how do I get a 1918 death certificate from Scranton? And AI will come back with a step-by-step approach to getting it. So AI can be really, really helpful in cutting through all that red tape and bureaucracy and Googling. AI essentially just does all the Googling for you and says, oh, I found this and here's the answer. So it's really, really helpful that way. Now, United States newspapers are very helpful. Some of them are on Family Search, and they give a huge information about the entire family. Gleason in this city, September the 10th, 1900. Martin, beloved son of Margaret and Martin. So now you have his parents. A brother of Patrick, Michael, Philip, Nora, Annie, Josie, Dennis, James, and Daniel. We had big families in the Gleason part of the world. And they were natives of Nina. So now you have a huge amount of information about this person, but also about the family. There's some newspaper reports for some of the O'Malleys as well. This one goes back to 1835, and it talks about the death at Ayr Court of consumption of George May O'Malley, the eldest son of the late Peter O'Malley, in the county of Galway of Snugborough. So again, a huge amount of information that will allow you to build the family tree on that side. And similarly, the death of Mr. Joseph B. O'Malley from Clunane, which is just down the road, after prolonged and painful illness. This deservedly esteemed gentleman departed this life on the 11th at his residence, Clunane, surrounded by his relatives and friends and fortified by the rites of the Holy Church. The deceased was son of the late Mr. Charles O'Malley. So again, you're building out the family tree of Clunane, and a brother to the respected and pious parish priest of Island 80, the Reverend Thomas O'Malley. So lots of information in the newspapers there just to be mined at your will. And it's very helpful for proving that each person is the child of their parents. It is always good practice to try to apply the genealogical proof standard. And usually that means having 3 pieces of independent evidence that connects a particular child to a particular set of parents. But the chances of having that with early Irish records, which are so sparse, you'll be lucky if you can find just the one record. But the genealogical proof standard requires a reasonably exhaustive search, complete citation of sources, analysis and correlation. You want to try and correlate different records with each other so that you can say, well, this census, the address on the census links with the address on the birth certificate. So I know it's the same family because the address is linking these 2 records together. You need sound written conclusions, and we should try to correlate the various pieces of evidence with each other. The father's occupation is another way of tying records together. If he was a pawnbroker on the census, a pawnbroker on the birth records, then in all likelihood you know you're looking at the same person. And like I say, the address or the residence is also another very useful way of linking records together. And the types of proof that ties a child to a specific pair of parents include, obviously, the child's birth or baptism record, which has the names of the parents on it. in most cases. But of course, birth records officially from the government weren't available until 1864, and baptism records may not be available prior to 1830 from most places in Ireland, and in some places like Mayo and Galway, they may not be available prior to 1880. So you could be very lucky to actually find a baptism record for a particular child. But the parents' names would also be on that child's marriage record. He grows up, he gets married, and the names of the parents are usually on the marriage record. Certainly the name of the father would tend to be on the marriage record. Sometimes the name of the mother is not available on the marriage record. In the US, like we've seen, the death certificate of a child has fields where you can put the parents' names. Sadly, not all the time those fields are used. And if you don't find it for your ancestor, try and find it for his siblings. Census records of a known child with known siblings, and then there are the parents. So if you know the whole list of the siblings in the family, and some of them have unusual names, and then you find them in the census, then the census may very well have those parents' names in it. And then probate and will can be very useful as well. Sometimes it does mention the child, and it mentions, of course, the name of the person who died, who turns out to be the parents. So, like I say, if you cannot find proof for your earliest known ancestor, try and find proof for the ancestor's siblings, and that could be a workaround, going sideways to go back. The other thing that you can do is you can confirm the connection with appropriate DNA testing. So even if you think, well, I have everything I need, it's still useful considering a DNA test, because that should confirm what you actually have written and gained from the documentary records. So that's another very useful reason for doing DNA testing, not just to break through a brick wall, but to actually confirm the records that you've done so far. So that's step 4, access to the standard records. Step 5 would be characterizing brick walls. And that means characterizing your brick wall ancestor. And that would mean establishing his approximate year of birth. If you get a date, even better. And you can identify that his possible siblings from marriage records of him, because the people that were the sponsors at his marriage may very well be the groom's brothers and sisters, the bride's brothers and sisters. The baptism records of their children may also have the children's uncle and aunts. So siblings of the married couple may very well be the godmother, the godfather. So it's worthwhile looking at all of the sponsors and witnesses at the children's baptisms. Obituaries can be very useful. Probate and will can be very useful. And for identifying the possible parents, look to Irish naming convention. And I'll show you an example of that, because I was able to prove that Irish naming convention worked for my Gleason family, and was able to identify potential names for my earliest known ancestors' parents by doing that particular exercise. So we'll take a quick look at that. And then identify possible places where they might have lived, because that can be very, very useful when you have an idea where they lived and you have a potential record, but it's 50 miles away. Then you can say, well, that's probably not the correct record. I'm not going to attach it to my family tree. But here is how we would perhaps characterize each brick wall of an earliest known ancestor. The name and surname of that earliest known ancestor will be on the children's birth and baptism records. And also the children's marriage records, like I say, will record the name of the father. So that will give you at least a name, but you might not know when they were born, might not know any further information about them. And in my particular case, there's me down there, my dad, my granddad, great-grandfather, and my brick wall ancestors are John and Anne Gleason. So you had a John Gleason marrying an Anne Gleason. That can happen a lot. If they were first cousins, the marriage record should have a note saying that they got a dispensation from the bishop. But most of the time, people didn't marry their first cousins. But occasionally they did. In this particular case, there's no indication that they were related to each other. They had quite a few children. My great-grandfather Martin was the oldest, and then they had this slew of 7 other children. And this gives us an estimate of when they might have been born, because Martin was born in 1866, and assuming that they were at least 20 years old when they got married, we're looking for a birth record from maybe 1846 or maybe 1836. So you're looking at that time period. It gives you a clue. In actual fact, it turns out that John was born in 1832, and Anne was actually very young. She was only 18, so she was born in 1848. You can also get a lot of information from the marriage and children's birth records, and that gives you an idea of maybe where the family came from, a particular location. And also you can get information about when and where they died from the death record. Do they appear in the census? Are they missing in 1911 but they're present in 1901? So they must have died sometime between those 2 censuses. And the children's births or marriages may also have father deceased on the particular marriage record. So that means that the date of the marriage was after the death of your earliest known ancestor. So these are all clues to look out for in these various types of records. And like I say, siblings of your earliest known ancestors might be present on as godparents or sponsors at the children's baptisms or the marriage. Now, because these are all the sponsors of the 8 children of John and Anne Gleason, and there are several Gleasons there: Pat, Patrick, Anne, Mary, Bridget, and Kath. But because we're looking at 2 Gleasons, I don't actually know if it's on the father's Gleason side or the mother Gleason side, so I've just attached them to one side of the family, and that's where they're sitting at the moment. But at least I know that these are names to look out for when I'm doing some further research on the earliest known ancestor. Now, Irish naming convention is very interesting, and let's take a look at that. And this is Irish naming convention. The first son is named after the father's father, the second son after the mother's father, the third son after the father, the fourth son after the father's eldest brother, and the fifth son after the mother's eldest brother. And then for daughters, first daughter is named after the mother's mother, second after the father's mother, third after the mother, and the fourth, mother's eldest sister, the fifth, the father's eldest sister. Now, the problem with Irish naming convention is that it varied across the country. And whereas this is what happened mainly, there were certain counties where they changed it around, and also individual families sometimes adapted it to suit their own particular needs. So in terms of identifying the parents of your earliest known ancestor, if you have a list of siblings of your earliest known ancestor, the parents on the father's side will be the first son and the second daughter. So the first son will be named after the father's father. The second second daughter will be named after the father's mother. So you can identify the father's parents by using that technique. On the other side, if you want to find out who the parents of your earliest known female ancestor was, then the first daughter is named after the mother's mother, and the second son is named after the mother's father. And this is something I did. This is a useful article that discusses the whole thing. The link is in your handout. But this is something I did with my Gleasons. And the first son was Martin. The second, on the father's side, first son was Martin, and this one here, Martin 1866. So he should be the father's father. The second son was Timothy, and he should be the mother's father. And in fact, we were able to prove this with records. We actually did find records that confirmed that Timothy was the mother's father. If we look at the first daughter, which was Kathleen, this should be the mother's mother, and in fact, the mother's mother was Catherine or Kathleen. So we did actually find records that proved that. And the second daughter was Bridget, and she should be the father's mother, sitting up there. We have not been able to prove that at this point in time, but we were able to prove it on one side. I'll just skip through that. And we were able to prove it on Anne's side of the family, that her speculative parents, based on Irish naming convention, Timothy and Catherine, actually did exist. They were the correct names. And for that reason, because it worked on the maternal side of the family, it probably is also true on the paternal side. So that's a very important takeaway. If you prove it on one side, it's probably true on the other side as well. It's still speculative, but your probability maybe goes from 50-50 up to maybe 70-30. So that's Irish naming convention. The other thing that is very challenging is to try to identify the place that your ancestors came from. The subtitle of this particular part of the presentation could be, "You can't get there from here." So Irish place names can be very confusing, but it's also they can also be very useful to finding those Irish cousins who stayed behind. And these websites are in your handout. Irish Townlands, very, very useful. It kind of breaks down the various land divisions: county, barony, civil parish, townland, and then additional ones: electoral division, church parish, and poor law union. These are all important land divisions that may be important depending on which record set you're looking at. And the other useful website is Loganum, and it's that one there at the bottom. I don't know how to get rid of that. Loganum.ie, and that can be very useful as well. Here you see Stranorlor, which we came across previously. It tells you exactly where it is. It tells you that it can be the name of an electoral district, a civil parish, a townland, or even a town. So you have to decide, well, which one am I looking at? Am I looking at a specific townland, or is it a civil parish, which is a much larger land area? It gives you little translations into Irish, and you can also play those translations by clicking on the play sound. And it gives you a link to those places. The other useful website is John Grenham's Irish Ancestors website, and again you can enter in place names and he'll bring you up a whole load of sources for that particular place name. Now it's a subscription website, but you've got 5 goes before he asks you for money. So use it wisely. Come back to it the following day, or don't tell him, but occasionally I actually use it in 3 different browsers at the same time. So the last land division or land record I want to talk about is Griffith's Valuation, which is a census substitute from the mid-1800s. And again, it's free to access on Ask About Ireland. You can enter the name of the family and the first name of the individual. If you know the barony, the union, the parish, the county, you can put those in as well and click on search. And it gives you the option for including similar names. It also kind of emphasizes why it's important to know about the various land divisions. But it gives you some really, really useful information about where your ancestors may have lived in the mid-1800s. And one of my relatives of my ancestors was Andrew Spearing. He lived in Antrim. If I click on details, it brings up a whole load of information about who his landlord was, the specific location, and the associated land divisions with that location: county, barony, union, parish, townland, place name, place type. And it also tells me, importantly, when this was collected. And this information was collected in 1862. So I know that Andrew Spearing was alive in 1862. If you click on the maps, or click on the original page, it actually brings up the original page in the valuation where all of that information is written. And there he is down there, Andrew Spearing, second from the end, and it gives his house, offices and land valued with an acreage of 2 acres, 1 rood and 25 perches worth 5 shillings and 5 pounds and 5 shillings. That was a large house. He had a large house, and he was actually a doctor in Antrim, and he signed all the death certificates. So I see his name on all of the death certificates from Antrim for many, many years. But the great thing about Ask About Ireland is if you click on the maps, it allows you to toggle between the past and the present. The past and the present. So you can see here that the site of the fort is actually around the corner from Starbucks. And that is really useful information because it helps you locate exactly where things are today, where they used to be, based on what is near them today compared to where they were previously. And I've got some really nice maps coming up for you. The Griffiths valuation was also called the primary valuation, purely because primary means first. There was also a secondary, a tertiary, a quaternary, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and eighth. They continued all the way up to the present day. And those land valuation books are available in the valuation office in Dublin. But when they are digitized, as they are being at the moment, and they go up online, you will be able, from the comfort of your own home, to travel back from the land that is still owned by your family today all the way back in time to your earliest known ancestor in the mid-1800s. But also you'll be able to travel from the mid-1800s all the way up to the present day to find out who is living on your ancestral land today. And that is really exciting. And these books are a little bit difficult to navigate. They use different colors to indicate different years. There's a lot of crossing out, and you have to kind of look really carefully to see, okay, they were crossed out in that year, so they probably died. Martin died in 1902, and it was David, his son. Yes, that makes sense. David took over in 1902, but he's crossed out in 1905, and then it passed to one of the daughters. So it can be very useful for figuring out who took over from who, and gives you an idea of when people died, so you can go looking for a death certificate. Some of these are available online already, but more of them will come as time goes on. Now this is when we travel from the 1850s to the 2025s. This is the map from the 1850s. These are the hedges, the stone walls, these are the roads that existed at that time. There's a little round circle indicating a fairy fort. There's another circle up here indicating a fairy fort. These were from the 1850s. By the 1880s, they were in colour. But look what has happened to the divisions. The stone walls are still the same. Those fences, those hedges are still the same. So those landmarks would have been the same landmarks that your ancestors looked at when they opened the door in the morning and looked out at the day ahead. And this is bringing us up to the 2020s. And again, you can see that those land divisions, the hedges, the stone walls, are in the same places as you toggle between 1880 and 2020 and travel 140 years into the future and back into the past. So I think it's really quite amazing that we have this permanency of structures, architectural structures in our landscape that our ancestors would have looked at generations ago. And it is that permanence that reminds us that we can go out and touch that today. You can also come up to the very present day and get the land property deeds of various places of land that may be relevant to your ancestors. And you can see who is living on that land today. And that brings you up to the present day, to living people. And you can then search for them in the phone book. And I did that, and I was able to phone a fourth cousin that had never heard of me, and I'd never heard of him, and we had a lovely chat on the phone. And I was also then able to take the little yellow man on Google Maps and take myself on a virtual tour of my ancestral homeland. So this is a wonderful thing that you can do from wherever you are in the world. This is another time that it worked for me with my great-great-grandfather, Hugh Dockery, who lived in this beautiful, it's a listed, type 2 listed thatched cottage down in Kilmore in County Roscommon. So that's the records. Now we switch over to DNA.